My name is Fontaine. I'm 33 years old, and I can still feel the exact weight of the silver spoon my father used to prop up his image of me. It was a cold, heavy thing, more a tool for measuring than a gift for eating, and the afternoon I married a man with grease under his fingernails. My father stood up at my own wedding and erased me in a single sentence. He didn't yell. He was a man who didn't need to raise his voice to be heard over a crowd of 200. He simply raised his glass, looked down the length of our family's table, and said, "This is the last time we speak of her as a porter. Porters don't marry mechanics." My mother's face went white, not with anger at him, but with the sheer social panic of his having said the quiet part out loud. I was 27 then, too young to know that love and value were not the same currency. It has taken me 6 years to learn the price of a name, and exactly one afternoon to buy my own back. The first time I understood that my worth to my father was a line item, not feeling, I was 12 years old. I had just won the state mathematics competition, a regional event that took place in a convention center ballroom that smelled of stale coffee and desperation. I remember the blue ribbon, the way it felt like a smooth satin lie against my palm. I came home, still buzzing with the quiet, unshakable pride of having solved a problem that none of the boys from the private academies could crack. My father was in his study, and I burst through the door, holding the ribbon up like a flag. He looked at it, then at me, and I watched the calculation happen behind his eyes. He was a man who saw everything as a transaction, even joy. "Wonderful, Fontaine," he said, but his voice was flat, his focus already back on the spreadsheet that glowed on his screen. "That's a very useful skill. You know, the Caldwells are having a dinner party next month. Their son is struggling with algebra. I think we could work something out." He didn't say he was proud. He said it was useful. The number he assigned to my achievement was not a gold star, but a potential discount on a future business deal. He was already figuring out how to rent out my brain to the son of a man he wanted to impress. At 12, I was not a person. I was a resume for the family's social ambitions. Visual: a blue ribbon held by a child's hand, then a man's back turned to a desk. The second incident cemented the pattern. I was 16, and I had just been accepted into a competitive engineering program at the state university, an early admission that required an essay, letters of recommendation, and a test score that placed me in the top percentile of the entire region. I was proud of that acceptance letter, the thick envelope that felt like a future I had built entirely myself. My sister, Charlotte, was 3 years older, and she had just gotten engaged to a junior partner at a law firm, a man named Graham, whose father owned a chain of car dealerships. The night I told my mother about my acceptance, my father was reviewing the guest list for Charlotte's engagement party. He didn't look up. "Now, that's nice, Fontaine," he said, and I saw him make a small dismissive note on the guest list, a check mark next to a name I didn't recognize. "But Charlotte's engagement is the main event right now. We need to focus on that. Don't want to divert any attention with all this." He gestured vaguely at my letter, a wave of his hand that dismissed my entire future. "We'll talk about your plans after the wedding." He didn't say he was proud. He didn't say he was excited. He said my news was a distraction from the real family business, which was managing the public image of the Porters. I'd become an inconvenience, a detail to be managed after the more important event. I was 16, and I had just learned that my family's attention was a finite resource, and it was never allocated to me. From that day forward, I understood that my accomplishments were only celebrated insofar as they could be leveraged for social gain. The state math competition was a bargaining chip. My early admission was a scheduling conflict. I was a footnote in the story of our family's rise, and the only chapter that mattered was the one being written by my sister's diamond ring. For the next 11 years, I played the role they wrote for me. I was the quietly competent, unassuming daughter, the one who didn't cause a scene. I graduated from the engineering program, the one my father had dismissed as a distraction, with honors. I took a job at a small boutique firm in the city, designing sustainable building systems, work that was meticulous and invisible. It was work that kept the lights on, but it was never the main event. I bought my own car, a sensible sedan. I rented a small apartment that was too far from my father's coastal estate to be convenient for impromptu visits. I built a life that was both in and out of their orbit, a space of my own that they had never been interested in visiting. I was the other daughter, the one who lived in the city, the one whose job was practical, not prestigious. I was the reliable one, the one who would dog-sit for Charlotte and Graham when they went to the Hamptons, the one who would draft a spreadsheet for my mother's charity fundraiser, the one who would manage the online reservation system for the family's vacation home on the lake. I was the unpaid assistant, the invisible accountant, the logistics manager for a family that had never valued logistics. I was the shadow that ran the machine while they stood in the sun. And I did it for all of them, for over a decade, never once getting a single ounce of the credit that was due to me. The mechanism, the fulcrum that would eventually shift the entire weight of my family's narrative, was created on a rainy Tuesday in the fall of 2015. My father had just purchased a new larger yacht, a 72-foot monstrosity he named the Legacy, and he needed to update the insurance policy. He was in the middle of a conference call, one of his high-stakes calls with a potential investor, and he waved me into his study, holding out a binder. "Fontaine, darling, handle this for me, would you?" he said, his hand over the receiver. "It's just a bunch of paperwork, but I need it done by the end of the week." "You're better with this sort of thing than I am." I took the binder, a thick corporate blue thing, and I sat down in the leather chair opposite his desk. I had been handling paperwork like this for years. I knew how to read a contract. I knew how to spot a clause. And that's when I saw it, buried on page 47, a small, unassuming passage that had been written years earlier, when my grandfather, Ezekiel Porter, had originally started the trust fund. The clause was about the management of the family's real estate holdings, a set of properties that included my father's beloved coastal estates, the lake house, and a handful of commercial buildings. The clause stated that in the event of the primary trustee's incapacitation or neglect of duty, the management and final signing authority would revert to the oldest living grandchild. My father was the primary trustee. My sister, Charlotte, was the oldest grandchild. But the clause also stipulated that the trust could be amended by a secondary authorized signatory, a position created to ensure the trust's smooth operation if the primary signatory was unavailable. My father, in his rush to handle the yacht insurance, had accidentally sent me the binder with the relevant documents. He had never checked it. He had never read it. He had just handed it to me, his useful invisible daughter, and told me to handle it. I sat in that leather chair, the rain pattering against the window, and I read that clause 3 times. The lawyer's language was dense, but the meaning was clear. The secondary signatory on my grandfather's trust was empty. It could be filled. And if it was filled with my name, it would give me direct, legal, and irrevocable access to the one thing my father valued above all else: the properties, the assets, the very foundations of the Porter name. I didn't realize it then, but I had just found the key to a door I hadn't known existed, the lock to the house that had kept me out for 33 years. Visual: a rainy window, a thick blue binder open to a page with a specific clause highlighted. The escalation, the slow erasure, continued in the years that followed, a quiet and methodical series of unkindnesses. I was 30 when I launched my own sustainable engineering firm, a modest operation that specialized in retrofitting old buildings with modern, efficient systems. I was proud of it. It was mine. I had scraped together the seed money myself, had built the client list one by one, had worked 18-hour days to prove that I could be more than my father's shadow. At a family dinner, a small affair to celebrate Charlotte's 40th birthday, I mentioned the firm to my uncle, my father's brother, a man who always seemed to be looking for a tax write-off. "It's going well," I said, careful not to sound boastful. "We just secured a contract with the city to upgrade the HVAC systems in the municipal buildings. It's a modest start, but it's growing." My father, who had been listening to Charlotte describe her latest renovation of the Hamptons house, turned and looked at me. He had a bemused smile on his face, the same smile he used when a junior associate presented a half-baked idea. "Fontaine, darling," he said, his voice dripping with a condescension that was so casual, so natural, it was almost worse than outright insult. "It's very cute. A little startup, a little pet project. But we all know it's just a hobby, don't we? Something to keep you busy while you figure out what you really want to do." He laughed, and my mother joined in, a polite tinkling sound that was meant to soften the blow. But the blow was real. I had just told my family that I had built a company from nothing, and my father had reduced it to a pastime, a plaything. I was 30 years old, and I was still just a child playing at business. It was in that moment, over the wilted arugula on my plate, that I understood the pattern had not ended. It had simply entered a new phase. I was not a partner, not a founder, not a person worthy of respect. I was still just a source of invisible labor, a name on a piece of paper that could be dismissed with a wave of the hand. He had not asked me a single question about the firm. He hadn't asked about the clients, the contracts, the financial projections. He had simply called it cute, a word you use for a puppy or a child's drawing, not a woman's professional achievement. In the space of that single sentence, my father had confirmed what I had known for 21 years. My value was not in what I did, but in how I served his image of himself. That was the first time I thought about the binder. I didn't look at it, but I remembered it was in my closet. The second escalation came a year later, when my father was hosting the annual Porter Family Foundation Gala, a black tie event that was more a showcase for his wealth than a legitimate charity fundraiser. Charlotte was on the planning committee, of course, the public face of the family's philanthropy. I was, as usual, in the background, managing the logistics. I had been put in charge of the seating chart, a thankless task that involved placating the egos of a dozen wealthy couples who couldn't be placed too close to the bar or too far from the podium. I did it flawlessly, as I always did, smoothing the ruffled feathers of a billionaire's wife who was upset about the flower arrangements. As the gala was drawing to a close, I was at the registration table, gathering the donations, when my mother came over, a glass of champagne in her hand. "Fontaine, you've been a marvel tonight," she said, and for a fleeting moment, I allowed myself to believe I was being seen. I don't know what I would have done without you." Then she leaned in, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "You know, your father is thinking of stepping down from the foundation board. He wants to give the reins to someone with a fresh perspective. He's been talking to Charlotte about taking over as chairwoman." She paused, taking a sip of her champagne. "It's a lot of responsibility, but I think she's ready." I looked at my mother, the woman who had just thanked me for organizing the entire gala. I had spent 3 weeks on this event. I had managed the venue, the catering, the entertainment, the invitations, the donations. I had created the foundation's entire annual report, the one that was being handed to every guest as they walked in. I had done the work of a senior executive, and my mother had just told me the chairmanship, the public acknowledgement, the power and the prestige was going to my sister, who had made a few phone calls and picked out her dress. I smiled. Of course, Mom," I said. "That makes sense." The transaction was complete. I had provided the value, and Charlotte was receiving the reward. It was just another Tuesday. Visual: a black tie gala, a woman standing behind a registration table, a champagne glass in the foreground. I was 33 when I quietly activated the lever. It was a Wednesday, and I had just come home from a site visit, my boots caked in the mud from a new construction project. I was tired, the bone-deep exhaustion of having worked 12 hours, and I was thinking about the binder. I had been thinking about it for 6 years, ever since I found the clause, but it had always been an abstract thought, a legal curiosity. That Wednesday it became a plan. I waited until my father was out of the country, a business trip to Singapore, and I went to the family's main office. I told the receptionist, a young woman who had been hired by my mother, that I needed to review some documents for my father's upcoming estate planning meeting. She didn't question me. I was Fontaine Porter, the reliable daughter, the one who handled things. I went into the file room, a small windowless space filled with decades of financial records, and I found the original trust document. I copied the relevant clause onto a single sheet of paper, a clean, pristine copy that looked like it had come from a lawyer's office. I signed my name on the line for the secondary authorized signatory. I filled out the date, the time, and I placed my signature next to my printed name. It was a mundane act. A pen on paper, a small bureaucratic detail that would, in the eyes of the law, change the entire structure of my family's wealth. I didn't feel a surge of power. I felt a curious sense of calm. The same calm you feel when you're looking at a complex problem and you finally see the solution, the hidden variable that makes everything else irrelevant. It had taken me seconds to do it. It had taken me 33 years to get to that second. I put the document back in the file, exactly where I had found it, and I walked out of the office. I didn't look back. The machine was now in motion, and it would not stop until I pulled the plug. The day of the reckoning was my sister's 40th birthday party, a lavish affair held at the Maine Porter estate on the Carolina coast. My father had spared no expense. There was a tent on the lawn, a string quartet, and a caterer flown in from New York. The guest list was a who's who of the Carolina elite, the people my father had spent his life trying to impress. The Whitakers, a family that owned a shipping conglomerate, were seated at the head table. Their daughter, Eleanor, was a friend of Charlotte's, a woman whose jewelry cost more than most people's houses. I had been invited, of course. I was still a Porter, still a part of the family tableau, even if I was only there to fill out the seating chart. I arrived alone, wearing a simple off-the-rack dress that I had bought the week before. It was navy blue, unobtrusive. I was there to be seen, not to be heard. The evening progressed like a well-rehearsed play. Charlotte was the star, her dress a cascade of silk and sequin. Graham was at her side, his smile a little too wide, his hand always on her back. My father was the narrator, the man who had orchestrated the entire event. He stood on the small stage that had been erected at the edge of the tent, and he tapped a spoon against his champagne glass, a signal for silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying across the crowd with practiced ease. "Welcome to our home. Tonight, we celebrate the woman who is, without a doubt, the greatest success story our family has ever known." He looked at Charlotte, his face a mask of paternal pride. "My daughter, Charlotte. She has built a career, a family, and a life that is a testament to the Porter name. She is everything a father could hope for." There was applause, a polite, genteel round of clapping. I sat at my table, watching my sister beam. I knew what was coming. It was the same speech he had given at her engagement party, at her wedding, at the foundation gala. It was the standard script, the one that painted Charlotte as the golden child and me as the unmentioned backup. Then my father's eyes found me. No, he was looking directly at me, his smile unwavering. "And Fontaine," he said, and the word hung in the air, a pause that was filled with the rustle of silk and the clinking of champagne flutes. "My younger daughter, the one who makes it all work. The one who's always there to clean up the mess." He laughed, a short, sharp sound, and the crowd, sensing the joke, laughed with him. "You know, she's our little secret weapon. She can fix anything. A broken pipe, a scheduling conflict, a problem with the computer system. She's invaluable." He paused, and I felt the weight of the moment. Nay. He was framing my role, my entire life, as a service to them. I was the fixer, the cleaner, the one who made sure the gears turned. But I was not the star. I was not the success story. I was not a Porter in the way he meant it. "We're all so proud of what you do, Fontaine," he said, his voice dripping with a condescension that was so casual, so natural, it was almost worse than outright insult. "You're a wonder. But you know, we always say, porters don't marry mechanics." He laughed again, a little louder this time, as if he had just made a clever point. We rely on them." The crowd laughed again, a wave of polite, complicit sound that washed over me, like dirty water. I sat there, still, and I could feel the ghost of my husband's hand in mine, the memory of the afternoon I had married a man with grease under his fingernails, the man my father had raised at my own wedding. The callback phrase was complete. Porters don't marry mechanics. It had been delivered at my wedding, in a private conversation with the family. It had been repeated at a dinner party 2 years ago, when my father had introduced me as the one who makes the coffee. It had been delivered just now, in front of 200 of the most powerful people in the state. It was the official script of my invisibility. I took a slow, deliberate breath. I felt the piece of paper in my clutch. It was a single sheet of paper, folded into a small, neat square. I hadn't planned this moment. I had planned to let the mechanism work silently, to let the legal wheels turn in the background. But my father had just given me a gift. He had given me the stage. I stood up. It was a small movement, but the silence was absolute. 200 people turned to look at me. my father's confusion palpable from the stage. I walked towards the podium, my heels clicking against the hardwood floor. I could feel the weight of Eleanor Whitaker's gaze on me, a gaze filled with idle curiosity. I reached the stage and I placed the piece of paper on the podium. Unedited. I didn't speak for a moment. I looked at my father, his face a mask of controlled displeasure. I looked at my mother, her eyes wide with panic. I looked at Charlotte, her carefully curated smile frozen on her face. I looked at the Whitakers, the high-status outsiders who were watching this family drama unfold. "Father," I said, my voice even, level, the same voice I used to make conference calls. "Do you remember the clause in grandfather's trust? The one about the secondary signatory?" My father's face went pale. It was a subtle shift, but it was there. "I don't know what you're talking about, Fontaine," he said, his voice a sharp, clipped command. "This is hardly the time." "It is actually the perfect time," I said, and I unfolded the paper. It was a copy of the clause, with my signature clearly visible. I held it up. It was not a weapon. It was a document. I signed myself as the secondary authorized signatory on the Porter Family Trust. I did it 3 weeks ago. There was a murmur in the crowd, a low hum of confusion. "That's ridiculous," my father said, his composure cracking. "That trust is a private matter. It doesn't affect anything. It affects everything," I said. "It affects the deed to this house, the deed to the Leck House, the commercial properties in Charleston, the holdings in the Foundation's name. I am now a signatory. I have the legal authority to freeze any transaction, any sale, any transfer of assets until I approve it in writing." I turned to the crowd, my voice calm. "As of 3 weeks ago, the Porter family cannot sell a single property, cannot liquidate a single investment, cannot even refinance a mortgage without my signature." I placed the paper back on the podium. "Now, so when you told me I was just invaluable, you were right. I'm the one with the keys to the kingdom. I'm the one you've been ignoring for 33 years, the one you called a hobby and a distraction." "Yeah. And I just decided to lock the door." The silence was absolute. I looked at my father. "You always said I was good at fixing things," I said. "I just fixed the accounting. I fixed the balance sheet. I put my name on it, since you never bothered to." Then I looked at my mother. "And you, Mom. You always told me I was the one who understood." "Well, I do now." The callback phrase had been weaponized. It had been returned to them with a new meaning, a legal and financial consequence they had never anticipated. Visual: a woman in a navy dress standing at a podium, holding up a single sheet of paper. Eleanor Whitaker stood up. She was a tall woman, with sharp cheekbones and an air of undeniable authority. She walked over to the stage, her eyes fixed on the paper I had placed there. "May I?" she asked, her voice polite but firm. I nodded. She picked up the paper, read it, and her expression shifted from curiosity to something else. "Recognition. Ah, you see? This is a legitimate document," she said, her voice carrying across the room. "I handle my own family's estate. This is a standard, but powerful clause. It's a legal and binding part of the trust." She looked at my father. "Ezekiel Porter was a savvy man. He did not build this trust without considering a fail-safe. It seems that fail-safe has just been activated." She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of approval in her eyes. "It's a very clever piece of legal maneuvering," she said. The validation from the outsider, the high-status witness my father had been so desperate to impress, was complete. Eleanor Whittaker had just confirmed my version of events, not out of sympathy, but out of professional respect for the law. My father looked at her, his face a mask of shock. He had been publicly, officially, and irreversibly outmaneuvered. He had spent his life trying to impress the Whittakers, and their matriarch had just acknowledged his daughter, the dismissed one, as the more formidable player. The fallout was immediate and absolute. My father's carefully constructed world began to crumble, not because I took anything, but because I simply stopped giving. I had provided the invisible labor for years, the calendar management, the tax returns, the property taxes, the insurance payments, the maintenance schedules, the social obligations. I stopped. I didn't call to remind them of the property tax deadline. I didn't send the updated insurance paperwork. I didn't manage the rental calendar for the lake house. The machine, the one that ran on my unpaid effort, simply ground to a halt. The first sign was the lake house. My father had been planning to sell it, a deal worth over $1 million, to a developer who wanted to build a luxury hotel. I had prepared all the paperwork, as I always did. Without my signature, the deal stalled. The developer pulled out, citing the delays. The second sign was the foundation. My father had been in the middle of a major fundraising campaign. I had been the one to manage the donor database, the one to send the thank you notes, the one to coordinate the events. I stopped. The donations dried up. The campaign failed. The third sign was the most public. Nay. My father had been planning to renovate the main estate, a massive project that required permits, financing, and a team of architects. I had been the one to vet the contractors, to review the contracts. Without me, the project spiraled into chaos. The contractors quit. The permits were denied. The estate, his beloved symbol of the Porter name, began to look tired and neglected. My father's assets, built on the foundation of my invisible labor, began to stagnate. The bank, noticing the legal freeze and the sudden lack of activity, began to ask questions. My father's image of power and control shattered. He was stuck. He had the wealth, but he couldn't access it. He had the name, but he couldn't sell it. He had been relying on me to keep the machine running, and he had finally realized, too late, that I was the engine. I had not attacked him. I had simply unplugged the machine and walked away. Visual: an empty lake house, a stack of unopened mail on a marble foyer table, a man staring at a bank statement. The days that followed were loud. My father called. No, he screamed. Porters don't marry mechanics, he yelled into the phone. How could you do this? It's not your money. It's not your legacy. It's mine. I listened, my face calm, and I said nothing. He raged, a torrent of insults and legal threats. I let him exhaust himself, and then I hung up. My mother called, her voice a frantic, pleading whisper. Fontaine, please, you have to understand. He didn't mean it. He's just proud. You know how he is. It's just his way. You always understand. I listened, and I said nothing. Charlotte called. She didn't scream. She was quieter, more guarded. She was the golden child, the one who had inherited the narrative, and she was facing the fact that the narrative was built on a lie. He didn't mean it the way you think, she said. Adam, he's just worried about the family name. I listened. I said nothing. The calls were the new currency. I was no longer useful to them as a worker. Now I was useful to them as a target. But I had been a target my whole life. The difference was, I had finally learned how to disarm the weapon. Then the quieter flicker. My mother, the one who had always told me I understood, sent me an email. It was not an apology. It was not a confession. It was a single sentence, written in the passive voice she always used when she couldn't face the truth. I think I lost track of who you actually were. I read that line 3 times. It was a flicker of self-awareness, a glimpse of the years I had spent managing her life while she looked past me. She didn't say she was sorry. She didn't say I was right. She didn't ask me to come back. But she had, for the first time in 33 years, acknowledged that I had been a person, not a role. I read the email and I felt a strange, hollow relief. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. It was just a crack in the wall. A small admission that the version of events she had been telling herself, the script she had been following, was wrong. It was enough. It was all I needed to close the chapter. I'm 33 years old. I'm so bored. I live in a small apartment, in a city I chose, a city that doesn't know the porter name. I wake up to the sound of the street cleaners, not the waves. I make my own coffee, and I drink it out of a mug I bought myself, a simple ceramic thing that has no family crest on it. I bought a table, a solid oak table that I found at a used furniture store, and I sat at it this morning, a single-place setting, and I looked at the view of the city skyline through my window. The only sound in the apartment is the gentle hum of my refrigerator. My phone is silent. No, it has been silent for 3 days. They have stopped calling. They have stopped screaming. The silence is not cold. It is the most generous thing they have ever given me. It is the first time in my life I am being paid in the only currency that matters. Peace. I'm Fontaine. I'm 33, and I finally know what I'm worth. Visual, a small apartment, a woman drinking coffee from a plain ceramic mug at a simple oak table, the city skyline through a window.